History rarely changes in a single thunderclap. It shifts quietly at first, like wind gathering over dark water, then suddenly with force enough to move continents. In the Second World War, entire nations rose and fell not in one decisive blow, but in moments when exhausted soldiers held a line a few minutes longer, when commanders made choices under crushing uncertainty, when factories worked through the night to produce one more tank, one more aircraft, one more chance. For years the Axis powers appeared unstoppable. Europe fell in weeks, armies disintegrated, flags were lowered. Yet beneath that thunder of conquest, something else was forming: resistance, adaptation, resolve. The tide was already preparing to turn. In the autumn of 1939, German armored columns cut through Poland with terrifying precision. Tanks rolled forward in coordinated waves while dive bombers screamed overhead, breaking defensive lines before they could stabilize. Blitzkrieg was not merely a tactic, it was psychological warfare. It shattered not only armies but confidence. By spring 1940, Denmark and Norway had fallen. In May, the German advance into France stunned the world. The Maginot Line, symbol of French security, was bypassed through the dense Ardennes forest, terrain believed unsuitable for mass armor. Within weeks, France collapsed. Paris fell silent under occupation. Soldiers who had fought in the trenches of the First World War watched in disbelief as another war moved faster than anyone imagined possible. Britain stood alone. Across the Channel, citizens listened to speeches that blended fear with defiance. They prepared for invasion. They dug trenches in public parks. They learned the sound of sirens. Above them, a different battle was forming, the Battle of Britain. When the Luftwaffe began its assault in the summer of 1940, the objective was clear: destroy Britain's air defenses, clear the skies, and pave the way for invasion. German bombers crossed the Channel in disciplined formations, escorted by fighters. Radar stations along England's coast detected them long before they appeared in view. Inside dimly lit control rooms, young women plotted incoming formations with colored markers on large tables, directing squadrons to intercept. Pilots scrambled into the air with minutes to spare. The sky became a battlefield of spiraling aircraft, black smoke trails and sudden bursts of flame. The sound of engines never ceased. Day after day, waves of bombers came. Airfields were cratered, hangars burned, yet British fighters continued to rise. Then came the Blitz. German bombs fell on London and other cities night after night. Civilians sheltered in underground stations. Fires illuminated the skyline. Entire neighborhoods vanished, but morale did not collapse. In the smoke and rubble, people endured. And when the Luftwaffe shifted focus from airfields to cities, it unintentionally gave the Royal Air Force time to repair and regroup. By October 1940, Germany had failed to achieve air superiority. The invasion was postponed indefinitely. It was the first time Nazi expansion had been stopped. But the war was far from over. In June 1941, German forces launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history. 3 massive army groups surged into the Soviet Union across a front spanning thousands of miles. Early advances were staggering. Entire Soviet armies were encircled. Prisoners marched westward in endless columns. It seemed once again that Blitzkrieg would decide the outcome before winter. Yet the Soviet Union did not collapse. Factories were dismantled piece by piece and transported east beyond the Ural Mountains. Civilians labored day and night to reassemble them. Entire cities became production centers for tanks and artillery. As German troops pushed toward Moscow, supply lines grew longer and more fragile. Fuel ran low. Spare parts became scarce. Roads dissolved into mud with autumn rains. Then winter arrived. The cold was merciless. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing. Engines refused to start. Weapons jammed. Frostbite took as many soldiers as bullets. Soviet forces, reinforced with fresh divisions accustomed to winter warfare, launched counterattacks at the gates of Moscow. For the first time, the German advance was pushed back. The myth of invincibility cracked again. While the Eastern Front consumed unimaginable resources, events elsewhere would reshape the war entirely. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. Battleships burned. Smoke darkened the sky. Within hours, the United States, an industrial giant that had remained officially neutral, entered the war. The global balance shifted overnight. American factories began producing weapons at a scale never before seen in human history. Shipyards expanded, assembly lines ran continuously, aircraft rolled out in numbers that dwarfed Axis production. The war was no longer confined to Europe and Asia. It had become a fully global conflict backed by immense industrial capacity. In the Pacific, Japan initially advanced with startling speed. Hong Kong fell, Singapore surrendered. The Philippines were overrun, but beneath these victories lay overextension. In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, intelligence would change everything. American codebreakers had deciphered key elements of Japanese naval plans. Aircraft carriers lay in wait. When Japanese planes struck Midway Island, American dive bombers found the enemy fleet at a moment of vulnerability, decks crowded with refueling aircraft. In minutes, 3 carriers were ablaze. A 4th soon followed. The loss was catastrophic for Japan. Experienced pilots, irreplaceable, were gone. The strategic initiative shifted. From that day forward, Japan would fight defensively. Back in North Africa, a different struggle unfolded across endless desert. German General Erwin Rommel had driven British forces back toward Egypt, threatening the Suez Canal. Yet supply shortages plagued the Axis. Fuel shipments were disrupted, reinforcements dwindled. At El Alamein in late 1942, British forces under new leadership launched a sustained assault. Artillery thundered across the desert night. Infantry advanced slowly through minefields. Axis defenses buckled. Retreat became unavoidable. Shortly after, Allied forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, squeezing Axis troops from both sides. By 1943, North Africa was lost to Germany. Then came Stalingrad. The city on the Volga became the crucible of total war. Bombardment reduced buildings to skeletal ruins. Soldiers fought for single rooms, for fragments of staircases, for shattered factories. Winter returned, harsher than before. In November 1942, Soviet forces encircled the German Sixth Army. Supply aircraft could not deliver enough food or ammunition. Hunger and cold consumed the trapped soldiers. In February 1943, the Sixth Army surrendered. It was the first complete destruction of a German field army. From that moment, the tide shifted irreversibly on the Eastern Front. The following year at Kursk, Germany attempted one final offensive to regain momentum, but Soviet defenses were deep and prepared. The largest tank battle in history erupted. Smoke and steel clashed across vast fields. German losses mounted. The offensive stalled. Soviet counterattacks followed, driving westward. In June 1944, the long-awaited invasion of Western Europe began. Thousands of ships crossed the Channel. Paratroopers descended in darkness. On the beaches of Normandy, soldiers waded through surf under machine gun fire. Casualties were heavy, but footholds were secured. France would be liberated. Germany now faced pressure from east and west simultaneously. Allied bombers targeted oil refineries and rail networks. Fuel shortages crippled mobility. Factories struggled to operate. By 1945, Soviet troops entered Berlin. Hitler was dead. Germany surrendered. In the Pacific, brutal island battles brought Allied forces closer to Japan. Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each victory carried immense cost. Firebombing devastated Japanese cities. Yet surrender did not come until atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan. The war ended, but the world that emerged was irrevocably transformed. The tide had not turned in a single battle. It shifted through resilience, adaptation, sacrifice, through radar rooms in England, frozen streets in Moscow, burning carriers at Midway, desert minefields at El Alamein, rubble in Stalingrad, steel on the beaches of Normandy. History bent slowly at first, then it surged, and in those pivotal moments the course of the 20th century changed forever. Momentum in war is a fragile illusion. It can feel permanent while it lasts, like a storm that never seems to weaken. But storms exhaust themselves. They stretch too far, consume too much energy, and eventually encounter resistance they cannot overcome. By 1943, the Axis powers were no longer advancing with the same terrifying certainty that had defined the early years of the conflict. The machinery of conquest was beginning to grind against the limits of fuel, manpower, and time. In the east, the surrender at Stalingrad had left a wound that would never fully heal. German formations that once spearheaded lightning offensives were now defensive, digging trenches instead of breaching them. Yet Adolf Hitler believed that one decisive strike could restore initiative. That belief would be tested on the rolling plains near Kursk. The Kursk salient bulged outward into German lines like a swollen artery. If severed by coordinated attacks from north and south, Soviet armies inside it could be encircled and destroyed. German planners assembled some of their most advanced tanks, Panthers and Tigers, hoping superior technology could compensate for dwindling numbers. The offensive began in July 1943, but the element of surprise was gone. Soviet intelligence had anticipated the attack. Defensive belts were constructed in depth, layered with trenches, anti-tank guns, and dense minefields. The earth itself had been reshaped to absorb the blow. When German armor advanced, it encountered a labyrinth of resistance. Mines tore apart tank tracks. Artillery rained down with calculated precision. Soviet T-34 tanks, simpler but numerous, counterattacked in waves. Near Prokhorovka, hundreds of armored vehicles collided in close-range combat. The battlefield dissolved into smoke and fire. The scale was unprecedented. Yet the German assault could not sustain momentum. Mechanical failures mounted. Casualties increased. Allied landings in Sicily forced Hitler to divert resources. Within days, the offensive stalled. Kursk became the last major German attempt to regain strategic initiative in the east. From that moment forward, the Red Army pressed westward relentlessly. Town after town fell. Rail lines were reclaimed. Factories destroyed during retreat were rebuilt. Soviet production outpaced expectations. The war that had begun with German blitzkrieg was now defined by Soviet endurance. While the Eastern Front consumed armies, another front tightened in the Mediterranean. After El Alamein and Operation Torch, Allied forces turned their attention to Sicily. In July 1943, they landed on its shores. The invasion triggered political upheaval in Italy. Benito Mussolini, once the embodiment of fascist ambition, was deposed by his own government. Italy sought an armistice, yet Germany moved swiftly to occupy the peninsula, transforming Italy into another battlefield. The terrain favored defenders, mountain ridges, narrow valleys, fortified lines stretching across the landscape. Battles such as Monte Cassino became grueling struggles for incremental gains. Monasteries were reduced to rubble. Soldiers advanced under relentless fire. Progress was slow, but the strategic impact was clear. Germany was now fighting on yet another front. Meanwhile, the skies over Europe darkened with the hum of engines. Allied bombing campaigns intensified. British aircraft struck at night, American bombers by day. Industrial centers, rail networks, and oil refineries became primary targets. The goal was not merely destruction, it was paralysis. At first, German production adapted. Factories relocated underground. Workers labored through bombardment. But as oil facilities were systematically targeted, the consequences became profound. Aircraft lacked fuel. Tanks could not maneuver freely. Training hours for pilots were reduced. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, struggled to defend its own airspace. Air superiority shifted decisively to the Allies. Across the English Channel, preparations for a return to Western Europe accelerated. Deception plans misled German intelligence into expecting landings at Pas-de-Calais. Inflatable tanks, false radio transmissions, and phantom divisions created an illusion of strength elsewhere. Then came June 6, 1944. Before dawn, paratroopers descended into the darkness of Normandy. Many landed far from their intended zones. Small groups formed spontaneously, improvising objectives. At sea, thousands of vessels moved steadily toward the coast. The beaches awaited. At Utah and Gold, progress came with determination. At Juno and Sword, Canadian and British forces secured ground under heavy fire. But at Omaha Beach, resistance was ferocious. German fortifications overlooked the shoreline. Machine gun fire cut through waves of advancing soldiers. Landing craft were destroyed. Chaos reigned. Yet amid the confusion, Individuals acted, officers rallied scattered units, engineers cleared obstacles under fire, naval guns adjusted their aim. Slowly, painfully, the line moved inland. By nightfall, footholds had been secured on all 5 beaches. The invasion of Western Europe had begun. For weeks, Allied forces fought through hedgerow country, a maze of thick vegetation that concealed defenders. Every field became a potential ambush, but air power and artillery gradually broke resistance. In August, Allied forces broke out from Normandy. Paris was liberated. Germany was now trapped between converging forces. In the east, Soviet offensives accelerated. The Red Army liberated vast territories, crossing into Poland and the Balkans. Entire German divisions were encircled and destroyed. The speed of Soviet advance astonished observers. Bridges were captured before demolition. Cities were seized before defenders could regroup. The tide was no longer turning. It was flowing westward with unstoppable force. As 1944 drew toward its end, Germany faced collapse. Yet Hitler remained convinced that a single bold strike could fracture Allied unity. That final gamble would unfold in the winter forests of the Ardennes. But even before that last attempt, the strategic equation had shifted irreversibly. Industrial output favored the Allies by overwhelming margins. Air superiority was secure. Naval dominance ensured supply lines remained intact. Across the Pacific, a similar pattern unfolded. Island by island, Allied forces advanced closer to Japan. Airfields captured in the Marianas allowed bombers to strike the Japanese homeland directly. Tokyo and other cities endured devastating firebombing campaigns. Yet surrender did not come. The war had become one of endurance and inevitability. The Axis had once defined the tempo of global conflict. Now they reacted, retreated, and rationed, dwindling reserves. The early thunder of conquest had faded into the grinding roar of defense, and the final chapter was approaching. The tide had not turned in a single battle. It shifted through resilience, adaptation, sacrifice, through radar rooms in England, frozen streets in Moscow, burning carriers at Midway, desert minefields at El Alamein, rubble in Stalingrad, steel on the beaches of Normandy. History bent slowly at first, then it surged, and in those pivotal moments, the course of the 20th century changed forever. By the winter of 1944, the war had changed character. It was no longer a contest of expansion but of survival for the Axis powers. German cities lay scarred by bombing. Rail lines twisted under repeated attacks. Fuel depots ran dry. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army surged forward with growing confidence. In the West, Allied forces pressed steadily toward the Rhine. Yet even in decline, a wounded regime can strike with sudden ferocity. In December 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive in the West. Under the cover of dense fog and snow, armored divisions moved through the Ardennes forest. The objective was bold and desperate: split the Allied front, seize the port of Antwerp, and force negotiations before total collapse. Surprise initially favored the attackers. American units, thinly spread and unprepared for a winter assault, were pushed back. A bulge formed in the Allied line. The Battle of the Bulge unfolded in bitter cold. Soldiers fought through snow-choked forests and frozen villages. German tanks advanced rapidly at first, but fuel shortages quickly became decisive. Without secure supply, momentum faltered. In Bastogne, surrounded American forces refused to surrender. Airborne troops endured shelling and freezing temperatures, holding defensive positions while awaiting relief. When the weather cleared, Allied aircraft returned to the skies. German columns were exposed and attacked relentlessly. The offensive stalled, then collapsed. Germany had spent precious reserves of men and machines it could not replace. The last gamble had failed. While that final struggle played out in the West, the Eastern Front surged with overwhelming force. In January 1945, the Red Army launched a massive offensive from the Vistula River toward the Oder. German defenses crumbled under sustained pressure. Soviet troops advanced at astonishing speed, liberating concentration camps, reclaiming devastated cities, and pushing toward Berlin itself. The psychological weight of inevitability descended upon the Third Reich. Refugees flooded westward, highways clogged with civilians fleeing the advancing front. Supplies dwindled further, Within Germany, the war effort strained under collapse, yet official proclamations still promised victory. In April 1945, Soviet forces encircled Berlin. Street by street, building by building, the city was consumed by battle. Artillery thundered without pause. Civilians sheltered in basements as soldiers fought through shattered avenues. The Reichstag, once a symbol of political authority, became the focal point of resistance. Adolf Hitler remained in his bunker beneath the city. As Soviet troops closed in, reality could no longer be denied. On April 30, 1945, he ended his life. Within days, Berlin fell. German commanders signed unconditional surrender in early May. In Europe, the war was over, but in the Pacific, fighting continued with unrelenting intensity. The island campaigns that followed Midway and Guadalcanal had brought Allied forces ever closer to Japan's home islands. Each battle revealed the determination of Japanese defenders. On Iwo Jima, American Marines advanced against deeply entrenched positions carved into volcanic rock. Every yard gained required sacrifice. The raising of the flag atop Mount Suribachi became an image of perseverance, but the cost was staggering. Okinawa proved even more devastating. Civilians were caught between advancing American troops and defending Japanese forces. Kamikaze aircraft hurled themselves against Allied ships in desperate waves. Casualties mounted on both sides. The scale of resistance suggested that an invasion of mainland Japan would result in catastrophic losses. American bombers, operating from newly captured bases, intensified raids against Japanese cities. Firebombing campaigns devastated urban centers. Entire districts were reduced to ash, yet surrender remained elusive. Japanese leadership debated options, divided between those seeking negotiation and those committed to continued resistance. Then, in August 1945, a new weapon entered history. On August 6, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion destroyed the city center in an instant. Tens of thousands died immediately. 3 days later, a second bomb struck Nagasaki. At the same time, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, rapidly defeating Japanese forces there. Confronted with unprecedented destruction and encirclement, Japan's emperor addressed his nation. For the first time, the voice of the sovereign was broadcast directly to the people. He announced surrender. The Second World War ended not with a single turning point, but with a convergence of them, from the skies above Britain to the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, from desert battles in North Africa to the beaches of Normandy, from carrier decks at Midway to the volcanic soil of Iwo Jima. Each moment shifted the balance incrementally. The Axis powers had risen on speed, surprise, and concentrated force, but they overreached. They underestimated industrial capacity, logistical endurance, and the resilience of societies under attack. The Allies adapted, they reorganized, they endured, they outproduced. The war reshaped borders and shattered empires. It accelerated decolonization and gave rise to new superpowers. The United Nations was founded in the hope of preventing another global catastrophe. Europe, devastated and divided, began a long reconstruction. The Cold War emerged from the uneasy alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union. Yet beneath geopolitical transformation lay a deeper truth. The tide of history turns not simply because of weapons or numbers, but because of human will, because pilots climb into aircraft despite fear, because civilians rebuild factories under bombardment, because soldiers hold lines through freezing nights. World War II demonstrated the fragility of peace and the scale of destruction modern industry can unleash, but it also revealed the capacity for resilience and cooperation in the face of darkness. The tide did not turn in one instant. It shifted in phases, hesitant at first, then undeniable, and when it finally flowed in the opposite direction, it carried the 20th century into a new and uncertain era. History bent, the world changed, and the echoes of those decisive moments still shape our present. The tide had not turned in a single battle. It shifted through resilience, adaptation, sacrifice, through radar rooms in England, frozen streets in Moscow, burning carriers at Midway, desert minefields at El Alamein, rubble in Stalingrad, steel on the beaches of Normandy. History bent slowly at first. Then it surged, and in those pivotal moments, the course of the 20th century changed forever.